20th Sunday in Ordinary Time.
One unifying theme for today's readings is God's plan to unite both Jewish and Gentile peoples into one family of God. For example, in the first reading from the prophet Isaiah, the Lord said, "My house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples." And in the second reading, St. Paul, who himself was Jewish, wrote, "I am the apostle to the Gentiles." And St. Paul worked hard that both Jew and Gentile may experience the mercy of God. Now in the Gospel, Jesus entered foreign territory, and a Canaanite woman, that is a non-Jewish woman, started calling out to Jesus, "Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." Today, unfortunately, many of our children are tormented by spirits, perhaps a spirit of addiction to drugs or of rebellion or fornication. And she recognized that problem. Yet notice that she didn't say, "Have pity on my daughter." She said, "Have pity on me." In other words, "I can't take it anymore. Please help me." But Jesus tested this woman's faith 3 times. At first, by not answering her. Secondly, by saying, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." In other words, you're not part of this family. And finally, Jesus tested her by saying, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." Now don't be scandalized. Jesus did and said this because everyone who humbles himself will be exalted. This mother responded by doing 4 things that you can also do. 1, she persevered. She didn't give up. 2, she asked the disciples' intercession. And the disciples basically said, "Lord, do something. This woman won't shut up." And 3, she came close to Jesus and bowed down and did him homage, saying, "Lord, help me." And finally 4, she responded not with indignation, but with humility. "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." And her faith and her humility really impressed Jesus because he said, "O woman, great is your faith." And her daughter was healed. You see, it is the humble and persistent prayers of parents that can bring healing and conversion and deliverance to their children. When I was a teenager, my mother came close to Jesus and started praying constantly for my conversion. And she probably overdid it because I became a priest. May God bless you.
Isaiah chapter 56 verse 1 and 6-7. I will bring foreigners to my holy mountain.
Thus says the Lord, observe what is right, do what is just. For my salvation is about to come, my justice about to be revealed. The foreigners who join themselves to the Lord, ministering to Him, loving the name of the Lord, and becoming His servants. All who keep the Sabbath free from profanation and hold to my covenant, them I will bring to my holy mountain and make joyful in my house of prayer. Their burnt offerings and sacrifices will be acceptable on my altar. For my house shall be called a house of prayer for all peoples. The word of the Lord.
Today's reading is very interesting on several levels. When King Herod rebuilt the temple between 19 and 9 BC, he built a large separated area referred to as the court of the Gentiles, because the Gentiles, non-Jews from any race or religion, were permitted to enter this great open courtyard of the temple area. Anywhere in it, but they were forbidden to go any further than the outer court. They were forbidden from entering any of the inner courts, and warning signs in Greek and Latin give strict warning that the penalty for such trespass was death. Matthew chapter 23 verse 13, Woe to you, scribes and Pharisees, you hypocrites! You lock the kingdom of heaven before human beings. You do not enter yourselves, nor do you allow entrance to those trying to enter. There were also political issues that required an exclusionary stance. In today's reading from the book of Isaiah, who lived 700 years before Christ, is welcoming foreigners, or non-believers to the temple. So what changed? The word Pharisee means separated ones. They strictly observed strict observance of religious ceremonies and practices. They thought of themselves as separated from the average person, or sinful ones. There are only a few differences between them and the Sadducees, another Jewish sect. God gave us the 10 Commandments to follow, and Jewish religious leaders added another 603 laws to the 10. This then gave them total control of temple activities, and for the most part, they turned from recognizing God's power as absolute to considering their own power as equal to God's power. As John Dahlberg Acton said, power tends to corrupt and absolute power corrupts absolutely. Today, we welcome all people to our church, and just like the people of Isaiah's time, the welcome is not unconditional. There must be a decision to commit to the rules. At most, if not all, funerals, the priest, and/or deacon, will make an announcement at communion time, that only Catholics may receive communion. If you are of another faith, you can still receive God's blessing by joining the communion line and crossing your arms across your chest. Every faith is structured by rules that show respect for God. Violators will not be killed, as was the case in the time of Jesus, if a non-believer attempted to enter the inner courts of the temple. Acts chapter 10 verses 34 to 35, Peter tells us, "Then Peter proceeded to speak and said, 'In truth, I see that God shows no partiality. Rather, in every nation whoever fears him and acts uprightly is acceptable to him.'" Christians show their devotion to the Lord by their service, worship, and obedience. Going back as far as Genesis, we hear God promise Abraham that through him all peoples of the world will be blessed. In Deuteronomy 3 verses 2 through 9, we read of the listing of those that are not permitted to worship in the temple. The author of this chapter has taken on a more open and universal position of welcoming, not excluding people. One of the marvelous things about community is that it enables us to welcome and help people in a way we couldn't as individuals. When we pool our strength and share the work and responsibility, we can welcome many people, even those in deep distress, and perhaps help them find self-confidence and inner healing.
God, let all the nations praise you. O God, let all the nations praise you. May God have pity on us and bless us. May he let his face shine upon us, so may your way be known upon earth. Among all nations, your salvation. O God, let all the nations praise you. May the nations be glad and exult, because you rule the peoples in equity. The nations on the earth you guide. O God, let all the nations praise you. May the peoples praise you, O God. May all the peoples praise you. May God bless us, and may all the ends of the earth fear him. O God, let all the nations praise you.
Psalm 67 verses 2 and 3, 5, 6, and 8. O God, let all the nations praise you. May God have pity on us and bless us, may he let his face shine upon us. So may your way be known upon earth, among all nations, your salvation. May the nations be glad and exult because you rule the peoples in equity, the nations on the earth you guide. May the peoples praise you, O God, may all the peoples praise you. May God bless us, and may all the ends of the earth fear him. This psalm was composed for public worship and was probably used as a form of thanksgiving at the time of the autumn harvest festival, Sukkot. May God be gracious and bless us. This prayer hopes the worshipper may find it easy to approach God. May he let his face shine upon us. This is another prayer that God's face will shine or smile upon us, indicating he is pleased with us and will support or fulfill the prayers of the worshipper. The consequence of God's graciousness and blessing is that his way will be demonstrated among all nations. It is interesting that when the church began it was known as the way. The nations of the world needed to learn God's way, but how was that done? Isaiah 49 verse 6 answers the question when it says, I will give light to the nations, that my salvation may reach to the ends of the earth. Israel was called to be the light to the world, a light that would expose God's love and salvation by reaching out to a world that was lost in darkness. The other nations wanted to know what Israel's God could do for his people, what a difference he made to them, and verification of the claims they had made on God's behalf. The stage was set for Israel to draw back the curtain of ignorance and shine the light of faith upon the world's stage. This psalm echoes the fulfillment of the Great Commissioning, when Jesus commanded that the gospel be taken to all nations. God is always gracious and loving. This psalm recognizes both of these facts. A theologian once said, love that goes up is worship, love that goes outward is affection, love that stoops down is grace. There is nothing in us that deserves being noticed, touched, or blessed by God, but still God blesses us, with grace we don't deserve, by stooping down to us, so that he can lift us up. Grace is when God gives us what we don't deserve. Mercy is when God doesn't give us what we do deserve. Romans chapter 11 verses 13 to 15 and 29 to 32. The gifts and the call of God for Israel are irrevocable.
Brothers and sisters, I am speaking to you Gentiles. Inasmuch as I am the apostle to the Gentiles, I glory in my ministry in order to make my race jealous, and thus save some of them. For if their rejection is the reconciliation of the world, what will their acceptance be but life from the dead? For the gifts and the call of God are irrevocable. Just as you once disobeyed God, but have now received mercy because of their disobedience, so they have now disobeyed in order that, by virtue of the mercy shown to you, they too may now receive mercy. For God delivered all to disobedience, that he might have mercy upon all. The word of the Lord.
Israel had rejected the Messiah. Since they had God rejected Israel? The failure of Israel to accept Jesus was a blessing to the Gentiles. Because Christians left Israel to avoid persecution, but when they left they took with them Christianity and began living the faith in other lands. Paul himself was an Orthodox Jew who had found Christianity, and spread the word to the Gentile nations. He himself was a blessing not only to the Gentiles by exposing them to Christianity, but also to Christianity by spreading the faith. Why is Paul trying to make the Jews jealous? He wants them to see the change that Christianity has made in the Gentiles, and wants them to find the same peace, and love, and security of Christianity. The book of Romans was written about 57 AD, as Paul was getting ready to visit Jerusalem. Another interesting thought on this subject comes from the book of James, written about 49 AD. James chapter 5 19-20, My brethren, if anyone among you wanders from the truth and someone brings him back, let him know that whoever brings back a sinner from the error of his ways will save his soul from death and will cover a multitude of sins. God had chosen Paul to reach out to the Gentiles and would certainly keep his promises to the chosen people. The Jews still have the opportunity to be saved because God never revokes his promises. For a discussion of the Church's view of salvation in relationship to other religions, see the Catechism of the Catholic Church 836-845. The church exists for nothing else but to draw men into Christ, to make them little Christs. If they are not doing that, all the cathedrals, clergy, missions, sermons, even the Bible itself, are simply a waste of time. God became man for no other purpose. C.S. Lewis.
Proclaimed the gospel of the kingdom and cured every disease among the people. Alleluia, alleluia, alleluia.
At that time Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman of that district came and called out, "Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon." But Jesus did not say a word in answer to her. Jesus' disciples came and asked him, "Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us." He said in reply, "I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel." But the woman came and did Jesus homage, saying, "Lord, help me." He said in reply, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." She said, "Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters." Then Jesus said to her in reply, "O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish." And the woman's daughter was healed from that hour. The Gospel of the Lord. Praise to you, Lord Jesus Christ.
Leaving that place, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. A Canaanite woman from that vicinity came to him, crying out,
"Lord, Son of David, have mercy on me. My daughter is suffering terribly from demon possession."
Jesus did not answer a word. So his disciples came to him and urged him,
"Send her away, for she keeps crying out after us."
He answered,
"I was sent only to the lost sheep of Israel."
The woman came and knelt before him.
"Lord, help me,"
she said. He replied,
"It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs."
"Yes, Lord,"
she said.
But even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table."
Then Jesus answered,
"Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted."
And her daughter was healed from that very hour.
Good morning. Well, when reading these passages today, I feel so honored to be the pastor of Holy Family Catholic Church, because I want you to look around this congregation. This congregation probably is one of the most diverse congregations in the diocese, and that's what every one of these passages of Scripture is about. We have people from all over the world. We have people from all different races and nationalities and everything else in this parish. And our home is here. And that's exactly what this gospel is about. This gospel and every single one of these passages are all about our God is a God for everyone. Jesus comes to redeem all, and all should be welcome here. Paul talks about it in the second reading. He tells us, he's giving out the case. The church went through this controversy from the very beginning. You know, it's only for the Jews. And Paul is the one who says, no, I'm preaching to the Gentiles. Christ is meant for everybody. God's love is meant for everybody. And he was the one at the Council of Jerusalem. And it was the church, firstly, one of the first controversies of the church was to address this matter. Has he come for all or just a certain group? So we are to recognize that. And so he speaks his term. And the first reading in Isaiah lived several hundred years before Jesus Christ. And he's addressing the fact that, well, you know, when you would go to the temple had a certain place where the Holy of Holies is where the priest who was making the offerings was only allowed. And then outside that was the men were given a spot. And then outside that, the women were allowed to be. And then outside the wall, the Gentiles, if they wanted to come, they could be. But if God forbid that they enter into the temple area, they were subject to die. And Isaiah turns to him and says, if a Gentile comes to make known the Sabbath, to praise God, they should receive just the same gift as everyone else. Boy, was that unique in his time. Several hundred years before Jesus. So that's what makes that first passage, very interesting. Isaiah is speaking about it. And of course, in Jesus' time, it still existed. In Jesus' time, everybody was like, we are. In fact, they didn't even get along with some of the other people that were part Jewish. You know, that's the whole scenario about this gospel. Samaritan woman, you know what Samaritan was? They were considered the half-breeds. They were Jewish, but they had intermarried. And so the rest of the Jews, well, you're not fully Jewish. You know, that's exactly what their response was. So Jesus comes. And we hear about the Samaritans all the time. We have the woman the woman at the well, Samaritan woman. He addresses her and brings her closer to it. So we have this passage here today. Another Samaritan woman comes, and he kind of acts kind of cold to her when we read it straight off. And I want to clarify a lot of this for you. This gospel occurs right after him walking on the water. You remember the story about him walking away? You should. It was last Sunday. Okay? Okay. And this immediately after him walking on water, he goes to the Jerusalem area, and that's sort of and has a conflict with the Pharisees and Sadducees. And so he says, "Oh no, they're they don't understand." And he has this conflict. So what does he do? He goes up to Tyre and Sidon, which is the northern part of the Sea of Galilee. And this is the Samaritan area. Now, scholars tell that the Greek Jews had settled in that area, and they were making it difficult for the Israelites, the Israelite community, the people who were fully Jewish, excuse me, they were making it difficult for them to be fed because they were taking over the farmlands. And so there was a conflict, not only because they were Samaritans, but there was a conflict between the two because the Israelite community was being mistreated by this group of Samaritans, and they were of Greek origin as well, Greek and Samaritans. So that there was that conflict. Now, I'm saying that to you because you have to understand. Why does Jesus go up to this area? One, to get away from it all. So, it's like, I need to get away. I need to, to put this into perspective, because the Jewish people are really attacking me, and the Pharisees are attacking me. So he gets away, gets out of their district. Secondly, he's up there with his apostles, and of course, immediately, what happens? He has some woman coming after him. I need help. I need him. And she's a Samaritan. Of course, the apostles are turning to him and saying, get rid of her. Get rid of her. She's making a scene. She's loud. And you're here for rest. And he turns to him and he makes his statement. I come for the house of Israel. I come to the lost tribes of Israel. In the sense that I come to them so that they may come and understand. That's what my first and primary goal is. That doesn't say he's not here for everybody, but he says if I can grasp hold of them, then it will grow. The message will grow. So he's not really saying that he's only coming for him, but he says his first chore is to bring the house of Israel back to an understanding of the loving God. And the woman says, oh, okay. But she still goes at him. Master, my child is sick, is ill. I need your help. And the words she uses, I know who you are. I know who you are, and I know what you can do. She makes the act of faith. And then Jesus still continues. He still continues, and he says, I'm not going to feed. The food is there for the Israelite community. And talk about, there's a relationship with what the scholars are saying. The scholars are saying is that the Israelite community wasn't being fed in that area because of the Greek people that were there. And see, he's really throwing a little jab, and he's good at those jabs. You know that. He gives a little jab about, you're not being kind to these people. You're not being, because of the farming that you're doing up here. And then she responds. She says, she admits it. She admits her failure, admits the thing, yes, I know. And proceeds to say to him, but the dogs, and that's what he refers to as, the dogs, feeding the dogs. And he says, but the dogs receive the scraps from the table. She admits the situation and proceeds to say, but we need to be touched by you as well. The statement, this whole gospel is about how we give of ourselves, how we see the love of God is for everybody. And of course, at that point, Jesus sees her faith. She admits to her failures, she admits to who she is, but he also admits that she sees the faith in Jesus Christ. And he says, yeah, your faith has healed you. By that she is being touched. Now this gospel and every one of these readings is talk about how we are called to share the love of God, among all people. This past week in our country, I've had you've seen one thing after another, Charlottesville, Boston, numerous places, whether it be for Confederate memorials or whatever. I saw a program just Friday night. I just happened to be turning on the TV. It was late Friday night, and it told the whole story about Charlottesville. And I tell you, I don't really care what it was about. But what I saw on the TV was two groups that were so angry and vicious at each other, I was almost in tears. Because that's not what Christ... If Christ was there, he would not be saying that. He would not be responding to no matter what you believe. If you have... the most important thing that we hear in our faith is that if you have difficulties, you come here and you see the love of God. And it's a call to us all to recognize that we are called to love. We are called to show the love of God in whatever we do, no matter how conflicting our ideals or our ideas are. We are called to remember that we are to show the compassion of Christ. That has been his message all along. And sometimes we forget about it when we get so caught up in the things that we believe. Whether it be politics or anything else, we are reminded that Jesus' response, he'll give a little jab, but we see his mercy. And that's what we are called to do. We don't proclaim hatred. We don't proclaim racism. We don't proclaim anything other than the love of God. And this gospel is so appropriate for what has occurred in our country and in our society in the past weeks that it's so. And I'm thinking, talk about God incidences. Here we are, right here and now. Here we hear the words of Jesus Christ telling us how we should respond and who we are. We are people of love. We are people showing the love of God in our lives. And if we can't do that, we're missing the boat. And that's what the response of this gospel is. Just last night, we had, at the Mass last night, we had several couples were celebrating their wedding anniversaries. One was a 50th anniversary, one was a 40th, one was a 28th anniversary. They came up for different things. And I said, that goes right along with what this gospel's saying. And for us to understand what love is. Because if you don't give of yourself in marriage, how many married people do we have here? God, you know better than me. If you don't give of yourself and swallow your pride at times in marriage, your marriage is not going to last. I always get a big kick out of it when the couples that come up for their 50th anniversary. I say, how do you stay married so long? And the husband, I have heard it numerous times. The husband stands there and he says, you learn to say, yes, dear. And it's a reminder to us about how we call ourselves Christians. We see it in our own relationships, and so we should see it in how we deal with others, not just our spouses. Of course, that's a good lesson for your spouses, but how we deal with the love of God in our daily activities.
Matthew chapter 15 verses 21 through 28. O woman, great is your faith.
At that time, Jesus withdrew to the region of Tyre and Sidon. And behold, a Canaanite woman of that district came and called out, Have pity on me, Lord, Son of David. My daughter is tormented by a demon. But Jesus did not say a word in answer to her. Jesus' disciples came and asked him, Send her away, for she keeps calling out after us. He said in reply, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. But the woman came and did Jesus homage, saying, Lord, help me. He said in reply, It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs. She said, Please, Lord, for even the dogs eat the scraps that fall from the table of their masters. Then Jesus said to her in reply, O woman, great is your faith. Let it be done for you as you wish. And the woman's daughter was healed from that hour. The Gospel of the Lord.
Tyre and Sidon are located in present-day Lebanon. They were Gentile cities and were often condemned by Old Testament prophets because of their Baal worship. Baal was the principal male god of the Phoenicians who populated the cities. These cities were also places of self-centered materialism. Jesus had completed his Galilean ministry and withdrew to the Gentile regions. Why? To rest from the crowds and get prepared for what was to follow. The woman called to him, Lord, Son of David, a phrase made popular by the Jews who needed healing. Why did they use that phrase? 1,000 years earlier a prophecy was given to David, that a son from his descendants would reign forever, and when he came the lame would walk, and the blind see. As a result, those Jews who believed were healed, and those who had witnessed the Jesus the Son of David, in recognition that he was the fulfillment of the Old Testament prophecy. Matthew 15 verse 24, he said in reply, I was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. Jesus had come to offer his own people the first opportunity to recognize him for who he was, the Son of God, and it was not his mission to bring blessings on the Gentiles. Matthew 15:26, he said in reply, "It is not right to take the food of the children and throw it to the dogs." Think of a family meal. The food, Jesus, is the food, provided by the head of the household, God the Father, for the benefit of his children, Israel. The Gentile woman recognized the analogy, and recognizing that she was not a Jew, a child of the chosen family, to which Jesus was given, in her humility, she saw herself as the household dog. Jews often called Gentiles dogs, and therefore neither she nor her daughter were entitled to the choicest of food, but both would be delighted with just a scrap, a crumb, that fell from the table. I'm sure you have prayed and offered petitions to Jesus, and it seems to you that he is ignoring you as he initially appeared to do with this woman. Jesus had heard her, yet in prayer, it was because of her persistence that he engaged her in a conversation after she knelt before him and continued praying. We should follow this woman's example and kneel before the Lord in persistent prayer. God enters by a private door into every individual. Ralph Waldo Emerson.
Hi, my name is Father Jonathan Meyer from All Saints Parish, and you are alive in your faith. Please join us at allsaintscatholic.net for resources to prepare for the upcoming Sunday. We have one heck of an amazing passage for the 20th Sunday of Ordinary Time, Year A. So I want to give a quick biblical tip for you. The most powerful analogy we have in the Bible of God's love for us is the image of marriage. A man loves a woman, and a woman loves a man. Throughout the whole entire Bible, God portrays himself as a mad lover in love with his bride. God is the groom, and his people, the church, are the bride. God, the groom, humanity, the bride. Now, in a universal sense, this is, if we think about just like the earth, we refer to her as Mother Nature. We think of Mother Earth in this sense. When we think of the church itself is feminine. Not that we're supposed to all be feminine because we're male and female, but the church itself is the bride of Christ. In the book of Revelation, this is fully revealed. God reveals himself to us in marriage. So in this spousal analogy, we deeply find out that God madly loves us. We're called to love God in a reciprocal way, that God wants to literally implant life within us. He wants to impregnate us with divine life. He wants us to give birth to divine life, and he wants us to nurture it. I mention this because it's important for us that every time that we have a woman in the Bible, we can interpret those passages under this great spousal or nuptial or marital analogy. This being the case, our gospel passage today is about a woman. Well, what do we know about this woman? Well, just beginning with what I just said, she's going to be a symbol of all of humanity. Sometimes this passage, can be looked at as confusing. Why is Jesus, not being nice to this woman? And what's this relationship to the dog? She is all of humanity. But particularly, it's being very clear that it's a Canaanite woman. Quick culture analysis. Canaanites were not Jews. They weren't Israelites. They weren't part of the house of Israel. So she's a foreign woman. So what about you and I? We're members of the church, right? Are we Jewish? I don't have any Jewish blood. Am I part of the house of Israel? I'm not part of the house of Israel. You see, the original plan is that Jesus came as a Jew to save the Jews. Now, his ultimate plan, of course, is to save all humanity, but clearly there was an order that was set. He was born a Jew to save the Jews, the king of the Jews, And yet Christ comes and radically shatters even that. And says, no, I'm here for everyone. I will save all. I will bring salvation to everyone. St. Paul makes this so clear in his writings. Jew or Greek, slave or free, male or female. He brings salvation to all. So we have here this woman, this foreigner who comes up to Jesus, and notice who she presents. My daughter, another woman, is tormented by a demon. Why? Because of the church. You and I are often tormented by demons. And we, the church, need to go to Jesus, and we need to beg for healing and beg for exorcisms. And then Jesus, following the pattern that was typically set out, says, send this woman away. I was only here for the house of Israel. But the woman is persistent. The church is persistent in her prayer. And then what happens? Miracles. O woman, how great is your faith. O church, how great is your faith. Let it be done to you as you wish. Let it be done to you as you wish. Let it be done to you as you wish. And I just think, once again, I'm going to bring this to another female example here. What was Mary's response to the angel? Let it be done to me. Did Mary tell this story to Jesus? How many times do you think Mary told the story of the angel and she said, let it be done to me? And so what does Jesus now say to this woman? Let it be done to you. Let it be done to you. Let it be done to you. We need to implore God. As the church, as the bride of Christ, as the spouse of God, we need to implore God. We need to beg Him. We need to be begging like a dog. Like a dog. And beg that the devil leave us. And we need to also know that God wants to treat us with grace and mercy as He did His mother. I have some questions for you this week. You can find these at allsaintscatholic.net. What's the message? What's the story that we have today? What's the good news that we find in this passage? The woman has a daughter who is tormented. Why might both be feminine? What does this symbolize? We just talked about that. Being tormented is different than possession. What's the difference? If you don't know the difference between demonic oppression or possession or torment, check it out. Very clear distinctions. Canaanites were not friends with Jews. What does this say about this woman and her desire to obtain something from Jesus? What does it mean that people that aren't even religious recognize Jesus, confess Jesus, acknowledge Jesus? And what does that mean about them on their path to salvation? The woman is persistent. Who do you know in your life that's persistent? And what does persistence get us? What's a time in your life that you've been persistent? And more importantly, what's a time in your life you've been persistent in prayer? Thank you for joining us for these reflections. I hope these questions help you delve deeper into the passages this weekend and help you to be the saint that God is calling you to be. Join us at allsaintscatholic.net to be alive in your faith.
Are you drifting away? The Church has often been viewed as the vessel of salvation. When we regularly gather to worship the Lord at church, we provide ourselves with an anchor that provides us with the stability we need in an otherwise unstable world. But skipping church is a clear sign that we are drifting away, or setting a new course for ourselves on the uncharted sea of the secular world. We can also skip church and attend at the same time. How is that possible? We mentally skip our worship service by not participating, allowing our mind to wander off to vacation plans, what to pick up at the grocery store on the way home. Hebrews chapter 2 verse 1. Therefore, we must attend all the more to what we have heard, so that we may not be carried away. We need to attend, and pay attention, to what we have heard. If we don't, we will not be reminded how we should conduct our lives. When our interest in God is diminished by worldly cares, we have already begun to drift away from the safe harbor the Church provides. As we drift, we will slip into troubling waters, the waves will increase, the storm will grow until we stop battling the storm and return to the Church, the ship of salvation. Bible reading, listening to Christian radio, watching Christian TV are but a few of the many opportunities we have to keep God in the center of our lives. Prayer is an important aspect of our communicating with God, the navigator of our life. If we stop talking to Him, the God who once felt so close will seem like a distant safe haven from which we are drifting away. An empty boat lacks a navigator and bounces from shore to shore as it attempts to navigate the narrow channels of life. A life that drifts away from God's will drift into sin. The Holy Spirit who lives within you, your conscience, sends a message when you drift off course, but a drifter is likely to ignore such warnings. If a Christian continually excuses their wandering ways and denies sin, then their conscience gradually numbs and accepts sin as a way of life in a fallen world. A person who becomes desensitized to wrongdoing has paved the way for more sinful behavior with less guilt, drifting away from God's divine power, not recognizing the many and undeserved graces given to us, and not recognizing His infinite mercy. We avoid church and anything else religious, because those activities might reawaken our conscience and thus the guilt that naturally accompanies sinful ways. It takes humility to ask for forgiveness, but the world is a prideful place where asking for forgiveness, or giving an apology is viewed as weakness. Are you drifting, or do you need to re-anchor in God's safe harbor, the church, not with a rope that will rot, and thus cause you to drift again, but with a chain that will hold you firm, forever? When you go to church you are really listening into the secret wireless from our friends. That is why the enemy is so anxious to prevent us from going. He does it by playing on our conceit and laziness and intellectual snobbery. C.S. Lewis, Mere Christianity.
This is a homily for the 20th Sunday in Ordinary Time. The Gospel for this Sunday comes from the Gospel of St. Matthew, chapter 15, verses 21 to 28. Today we listen to the story of Jesus and a woman who's referred to as a Canaanite. We could call this story a mini-drama in 3 acts. In Act 1, the woman approaches Jesus, addressing him by the very Jewish title, Son of David. "Lord, Son of David, take pity on me. My daughter is tormented by a devil." Jesus totally ignores her. In Act 2, the disciples appeal directly to Jesus about the woman, asking him to send her away. "Give her what she wants, because she keeps shouting after us." It would seem as though the disciples just want to get rid of the woman because she's becoming a nuisance. Jesus responds, but he addresses the disciples, not the woman. He tells the disciples that he was sent only to the lost sheep of the house of Israel. In other words, God has a plan in which salvation is offered first to the Jews, then eventually broadened to include all nations. But Israel is the priority in God's plan. Act 3. The woman approaches Jesus a second time. She now takes center stage. "Lord, help me." Jesus now speaks directly to her, and his words sound unsympathetic. His answer is not to grant her request, and he offers his rationale for not granting it. It is not fair to take the children's food and throw it to the house dogs. He will not grant the woman's request because she is not Jewish. But she's a feisty woman, insistent and demanding, and she will not be silenced by this rebuff. "Ah, yes, sir, but even house dogs can eat the scraps that fall from their master's table." She's saying in so many words that Jesus has so much power that he'll have more than enough power left over from what Israel doesn't need or doesn't want. Jesus is moved. "Woman, You have great faith. Let your wish be granted. Jesus' words give voice to what the woman's words have already demonstrated, her faith.
The woman came and knelt before him.
Lord, help me,
she said. He replied,
It is not right to take the children's bread and toss it to their dogs.
Yes, Lord,
she said.
but even the dogs eat the crumbs that fall from the master's table.
Then Jesus answered,
Woman, you have great faith. Your request is granted.
And her daughter was healed from that very hour.
So let's see what this story is saying. One of the tools that scripture scholars use to help them understand what a biblical text is saying is called redaction criticism. A redactor is an editor. So redaction criticism examines the way the evangelist constructs the story. The evangelist or gospel writer functions more like an editor. Matthew, for example, has the Gospel of St. Mark on the desk before him, and he incorporates about 90% of Mark's Gospel, making changes here and there. But he also incorporates a great deal of other material that we don't find in Mark's Gospel. So, let's examine some important and relevant aspects of the story to see how Matthew edits his story. Firstly, the setting of the story. In this case, the geographical setting of the story is important. We're told that Jesus leaves Gennesaret, which is on the western shore of the Lake of Galilee. He and his disciples go to the region of Tyre and Sidon. That's a journey of over 80 kilometers. They are now in Gentile territory. Who are the characters in the story? Well, the characters in the story are Jesus and his disciples, and in center stage, we have a woman who's referred to as a Canaanite. Now, the word Canaanite is used anachronistically here. Canaanite was the ancient name for the pagan inhabitants of that area. It would be the equivalent of today saying that a French person came from Gaul. The Canaanites were traditionally the bitter enemies of Israel, and their paganism often led Israel into idolatry. Mark calls the woman a Syro-Phoenician, and that's what people of Jesus' day would have called her. Matthew's use of the word Canaanite accentuates the distance between Jesus and the woman. She belongs to Israel's ancient enemy. She is not of his kind. A third question we need to ask is, who is Matthew's audience? Now, every effective writer or speaker knows that they must tailor their message to meet the needs of the audience they're hoping to reach. Let me offer you an example. Every Friday morning, I celebrate a Mass for one of the classes in our local primary school. At midday, I celebrate another Mass for the parish community. I preach at both Masses on the same Gospel, but my homily for the adults attending the parish Mass is quite different to the homily for a class of primary school children. So, who is Matthew writing his Gospel for? Every 4 years in Australia, we have to complete a census form. One of the questions asks, what is the person's religion? Now, if the community for whom Matthew was writing his Gospel were to respond to a question like that, they'd write down Jewish. The fact that they'd accepted that Jesus was God's anointed one, the Messiah, or the Christ, that didn't mean for them that they were no longer Jews. Quite the contrary. They believed that by accepting Jesus as the Messiah, their Jewish faith had been brought to its completion, its fulfillment. However, that belief was not shared by most Jews, and it will eventually lead to a split between Jews who accepted that Jesus was the Messiah and those that didn't. In time, these two groups went in very different directions, eventually becoming two quite distinct religions. But that final and definitive split hadn't yet occurred when Matthew was writing his Gospel. In fact, the parting of the ways between what we today know as two different religions, Judaism and Christianity, that split wasn't final or complete until sometime in the 4th century. So, Matthew's Gospel is helping his congregation to retain their allegiance to their ancestral scriptures. But he also wants to show how the story of Jesus has brought the story of Israel to its God-ordained goal. Matthew's congregation is moving towards a new world in which Jesus has been revealed as Israel's Messiah. But it's also a world in which most of those who become disciples of Jesus will be Gentiles and not Jews. Matthew may well be appealing to hardliners in his community who were insisting that you had to be Jewish to be part of the Jesus movement. We certainly know that St. Paul encountered hardliners like that in Galatia. So let's see how Matthew's Gospel prepares his congregation for this new world which will include Gentiles. That leads us into the next question. Why did Matthew include this particular story in his Gospel? Now keep in mind what St. John had to say at the very end of his Gospel. He wrote, "There was much else that Jesus did. If it were written down in detail, I do not suppose the world itself would hold all the books that would be written." Now, I believe each of the evangelists could say exactly the same thing. They all knew a great deal more about the life and teaching of Jesus than they included in their gospel. So that leads us to ask the question, why did Matthew include this particular story? At the beginning of Matthew's Gospel, we have the story of the wise men from the east who come to pay homage to the newly born King of the Jews. Following a star, they reach Jerusalem and they begin asking, "Where is the infant King of the Jews?" It's very important to keep in mind that these wise men, or magi, are not Jewish. When King Herod hears about an infant king of the Jews, he's alarmed. There's only room for one king, and that's himself. So King Herod summons the chief priests and scribes, asking them where the Messiah is to be born. And they're able to tell him straight away, quoting the prophet Micah, in Bethlehem, in the land of Judah. So the wise men set out for Bethlehem, and they find the child. But the chief priests and scribes remain right where they are in Jerusalem. They don't budge. So, here at the very beginning of Matthew's Gospel, we have wise men who are Gentiles seeking Jesus. But the Jewish leadership remains unmoved. Now let's go to the end of Matthew's Gospel. Here we find the risen Lord commanding his disciples to go and make disciples of all nations, baptize them in the name of the Father and of the Son and of the Holy Spirit. Note, all nations, not just Jews. So the story of the Canaanite woman is set halfway through Matthew's Gospel, and it's an important turning point. As we've heard, Jesus intends to seek out, firstly, the lost sheep of the house of Israel. God's plan doesn't exclude Gentiles. It will ultimately embrace Gentiles, but it must begin with Israel. That is Israel's vocation. The Canaanite woman and her daughter are not of the house of Israel. She acknowledges this. She acknowledges that Jesus is Israel's Messiah. She's already acclaimed him as the Son of David. And she believes that he is the one through whom God will be bringing salvation to the whole world. But she is now asking that God's plan for the future of the whole world break into this present moment by healing her daughter. This woman's faith breaks through the waiting period. We could say she jumps the queue. Her faith badgers Jesus to do in the present what is destined to happen in the future. Jesus is moved by her faith and changed by her boldness. He grants her wish. Let's now look at the context. In other words, where Matthew has chosen to place this story in the Gospel. We've already noted that the story is placed midway between the wise men from the east at the beginning of the Gospel and the command to make disciples of all nations at the end of the Gospel. But Matthew has also placed it close after the events that we heard in last Sunday's Gospel. Remember, we heard the story of Jesus walking on the water while his disciples battled a rough sea. Jesus has just told the Canaanite woman that she has great faith. What Jesus tells this woman is a dramatic contrast to what he said to Peter. Man of little faith, why did you doubt? You may recall that Peter begins to walk across the water towards Jesus, but his faith falters once he feels the power of the wind and the waves. The woman's faith was not shaken, even when she and her daughter were called dogs. Biblical scholar Gail O'Day summarizes what Matthew is doing in this story. She says, Matthew narrates a story that shows the power and possibility inherent in boldly insisting that God be faithful to God's promises. In the voice of this marginal woman who would not be silenced, even when no one seemed to listen, we hear the resilience of faith. The Canaanite woman's faith insisted on the fulfillment of the gospel promise. And Matthew asks that we, like Jesus himself, listen to her and be transformed through a faith like hers, persistent, vigorous, and confident in God's faithfulness to God's promises.
They told her go away, but she begged for him to stay. She cried for him to come, but He's here for his little sons. Why should he give his father's food to a dog such as you? She said, Jesus, my hope, I'm at the end of my rope. My child needs your touch. I know I ask way too much. I know where I'm from, but shameless I come for that one little crumb. That's what I need, something to feed. Oh, this desperate spirit in me. Jesus, I feel your power's real, and from one word you can heal. But if that's all he'll give, I know it'll make her live. My faith will stand and say, he chased her demons away. With this little son, I'm overcome. With this one little crumb, that's what I need, something to feed. Oh, this desperate spirit in me. Jesus, I feel your power's real, and from one word you can heal.